Hey, Alex, how are you doing, man?
Great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate your time. So why don't we get started and just maybe tell me a little bit about what it is that you're currently doing?
Yeah. So, I got into digital marketing back in 2008, 2009. I laugh all the time when people tell that story about when Al Gore said he invented the internet. I was definitely in the room when he flipped a switch, just growing up, kind of coming of age in that world of technology where we had the iPhone in our hand early. We had home computers in our home. We had internet. So that was really my passion. And recently last year, I was able to sell that company to private equity and shift more in from, agency builder mode into bigger plays, bigger roll-ups, more exciting investments.
Wow, man, that's awesome. And congratulations on that success. That's really awesome. Let's talk a little bit about, I have a food service background, and I believe you have a food service background. So I'd be really interested to hear kind of how you started out early days and then how that progressed into what you're doing now and kind of how you started your company.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my first service job was a busboy at Macaroni Grill out by Wolf Chase. That was my first taste in that world. And Macaroni Grill, I loved the place. That was the place back in the day, back in the mid 90s. So it just kind of got me thinking about that business as a way to make money where you could take cash home that night, right? It was tangible. You weren't waiting for it on a paycheck. So then I kind of leveraged that into waiting tables and into bartending. I worked at Don Pablo's, which was a cool little Mexican restaurant here back in the day, and some other places like Amerigo. Did that before I headed out to Denver. And out in Denver, I worked for some of the big steakhouses and nightclubs out there and kind of learned that super fine dining and then, high volume, turning drinks in the nightclub. And it was just one of those things that I loved. I always enjoyed. I enjoyed, being behind the bar, getting to know people. And I just learned that, if I wasn't on that side of the bar making money, I was on the other side spending it typically. So I just kind of became attached to that. And then as I got more into my career and started having younger kids, I just realized that industry was going to be really hard to stay. You don't get a lot of your nights and weekends. You don't get a lot of your holidays. And so I switched it up and went more into corporate America, I guess you should say. But then coming full circle, recently I've opened up a bar here in Memphis, a members-only speakeasy called Barron's that we're sitting in now, Bar 33. Was hidden behind a barbershop called Barron's. And the passion was for this to create a group of people in a place where we could come together and talk about business and talk about some of the things that we're tackling in our personal lives and our business lives with like-minded individuals. So it was very much a full circle moment to kind of get back here now where we're sitting.
Yeah, that's so crazy. This is such a great location, and I really, really appreciate you allowing us to use this to shoot our first season of the podcast and all our episodes here. It's such a great backdrop and great central location in Memphis, and so thank you so much for allowing us to do that.
Yeah, it was an honor. When you asked, it was a no-brainer for us. I mean, we're at that point now where, we want to gain exposure for the place, and it's a little bit of a escapism, right? You're kind of hidden right here in the middle of the city. So to be able to show it off in podcast form, I think is a great way to get some exposure for it. So I think it benefits both of us, and I appreciate you doing it.
Yeah, man, for sure. Talk to me a little bit about, because I always find it really interesting to talk to people about their transition. And so, you were working in bars, you were doing that, and then at some point you segued into the business world. What was that initial transition? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, what I realized is that typically the money was in the bars at night, the restaurants in the bars at nighttime. The day shifts were a little bit less profitable. So what I was thinking to myself was, how do I fill up my daytime hours with something that benefits me and then still have the money coming from the bar and the industry at night? And so I got into sales because bar and restaurants very similar. I mean, you're selling at the side of the table, you're selling yourself, you're getting to know people, you're kind of commission based, right? Earning tips to make your money. So it was a really natural thing for me to get into sales. So my first sales job was kind of go to door here in Memphis in businesses. And I had kind of three things in my bag. I could sell you AT&T if your phone bill was too high, credit card processing, or a website. So those were the kind of the things I had in my bag, and I cut my teeth doing that. Transitioned that into a professional sales job selling steel for a German company called Jakob. Then I did some professional sales with headhunting. So I was finding medical sales reps for St. Jude Medical and Orshire and some of these companies around the U.S. I was living in Denver at that time. But I still knew like there was still another level. And I thought really what I wanted to do was get into medical sales, specifically device. And I hadn't finished college yet. So I went back to university because all these jobs I was interviewing for, they loved me. They loved my sales shops, but all of them required a degree. So I went back and got my degree at Christian Brothers University here. And as I finished that, I got a couple offers. One of them was in commercial real estate to do commercial real estate sales. And the other was with Baber Direct Marketing, a guy who was doing direct sales marketing, like mailers to your home. And wanted to add website and SEO and that kind of world, which I had taught myself back in 2008. So that was really my first like step into that world. And pretty quickly I gave up the bar gig and, kind of transitioned more into, because I had kids at home, right? So working all day and then now I could go spend more time with the kids by having a salary and then being able to add commission on top of that. And I think that's super important in any career that you go into, especially if you know how to sell or you're learning how to sell, is to find careers that you're not capped, right? Because when you get capped, you tend to lose your you lose your step a little bit. And so I was constantly looking for places I could go where I was uncapped. And it can be a blessing and a curse because I think the first guy that I worked for uncapped, like he looked around and realized I was probably making as much money or close to as much money as he was making, so you gotta watch that. You gotta be working for people who want to see you win.
Yeah, it's a similar story with me getting into property management and kind of transitioning out of the restaurant world where it was work during the day in the leasing department and then go to the restaurant at night to work. So it's just interesting how things align and how similar our stories are in some aspects. What about when you first went to kind of decide to go it on your own and kind of start your own thing and your own business? When did you make that transition out of working for other people to doing your own thing?
Yeah, well, I did it certainly too late. I waited way too long. I was 35, 36 before I started my own company. And I had a really great thing going. I was making money and doing really well. And I wanted to start a new division of that company that I was working for that just focused on healthcare marketing. They were more into the nonprofit space and churches and nonprofits and kind of big Memphis brands, which was great. It was fun. But I'd met Dr. Kyle Fagala, who's an orthodontist here in Memphis, and we had become fast friends. And he started referring his other buddies to me. So now I've got an orthodontist in Tulsa and DC and Dallas and Denver and, it was Austin, Texas. I started kind of building up this network of orthodontists across the country and thought to myself, wow, this would just be a great niche to focus on. So I went to the guy that owned the company and, kind of pitched him this idea. And he liked the idea, but I don't know how much he liked the idea of me being a partner in the business. And so once I realized like, hey, I could do this without him, I could certainly bet on myself and probably win at this point. Like it felt like a winning proposition for me. That's when I made that jump. And so I tried it a couple different ways, right? As far as like going to the guy and trying to create a new division of this company, and then just going to a couple of banks and saying like, hey, I want to start this business. Can I get a line of credit for $100,000? And it was funny because like I was completely unbankable at the time. The banks were just like, nah, I mean, you could open a bank account with us, but we're not going to give you any money. And it was funny kind of looking back on it. It forced us to bootstrap the business, which was the best thing that ever could have happened.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the niche, right? And that's such an important thing, I think, for entrepreneurs to really understand is if you can find a niche within a niche of a business, then you can really focus on just being an expert in that, right? I think that real estate investment and property management can have kind of a very broad set of responsibilities and roles, but I focused in on kind of single family property management as my niche, which something back in 2010, there weren't a lot of people really that were just super focused on the single family. There were a lot of people who were focused on the multifamily, but no one who was really wanting to just become an expert in that single family. So I just find it so interesting. And it sounds like you kind of marketing with the orthodontist found that niche and then were able to kind of build on that.
Yeah. Did you find when you were focusing on the single family that people didn't do it because you were so spread out? Did you find yourself running around all the time? And I mean, what were your challenges in that?
It was just such an early time for the business that I think, the big money and the real estate funds and the institutional money was just really focused on building apartment complexes and kind of figuring out those processes. That the single family world had really become very operational within a certain city. So, you would have a lot of mom and pops. And that was really the bulk of the property managers at the time. And then you started to see around 2013, the institutional money kind of start coming into the space. And that's when really that business, in my opinion, started to get the attention and then started to become professionalized, right? And so after 2013, you started seeing larger companies come in and kind of doing that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. My parents have always owned single family homes here in Memphis and just kind of managed them themselves. I think that portfolio is probably close to, 15 or 20 homes, something like that. And it feels manageable, right, at that level. But what happens at 250 or 300 where you're at, right? It needs an entire operation to support that.
Oh yeah.
Mom and pop can't do it.
Yeah, 100%. So that's interesting also because you mentioned your parents owning investment properties, and I know that you own some vacation rentals and some other investment properties. So I'd be curious to hear from you. Kind of, you've got a sales and marketing and a food service background. At what point did you look at real estate as an additional investment source to place capital? How did you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I had money, like a few dollars in the bank, I just acted broke. I would just go spend it by buying real estate. It's like, if I've got this money sitting here, I'll spend it. How can I buy it as something, an asset, right, that will cash flow and maybe be something that we enjoy also. And so that's why our first investment properties that we made were places that we wanted to go: Hot Springs, Arkansas, Fort Walton Beach, Florida, where these, like, okay, we're already coming down here a lot. We're already spending money. So we know there's value. We know there's other people wanting to do it. So how can we offset some of our expenses or maybe even make some money? The other, I think, real clever play at that time that we were buying vacation property was you hadn't seen this like huge inflation in those numbers, right? And then COVID happened and people started really looking at where they spent their time because they were all kind of locked into their home. And so you saw beach properties take a huge jump in value. You saw lake property, waterfront property take a huge jump. So we really kind of got lucky that we bought before that happened, just on the idea that, hey, we could cash flow these. Little did we think that we would end up doubling the value of the homes, right? And then it just becomes a balance sheet play because, I mean, as you look at your personal financial statement, you buy something that costs you $600,000 that's worth $1.2 million later down the road. It's a really nice investment. So you don't get a lot of that in the single family, and I think that's why after we saw it with the lake, we saw it with the beach, that we kind of doubled down in that space a little bit. And then I started working with my buddy Jonathan Hour and Jones Hour, and look at some commercial real estate options. And my grandfather had owned some commercial real estate condos, and as they were kind of starting to get later in life and wanted to cash out some of that, it was just natural for me to take in some of that world. So I love being diversified in real estate. I love meeting guys like you who are doing big things and having a little bit sprinkled in different places because it's not my main thing. It feels good to have some diversity in that world.
So talk to me a little bit about maybe one of the biggest challenges that you have that you can think of in your career or a point in time in your career, and whether that's food service or in the marketing firms where you thought, maybe this isn't going to work out, or, you had to pivot. Can you kind of key back or think back to a time in which you had your biggest challenge?
Yeah, I definitely think, post COVID, when you start to kind of think, as my kids are getting older, right? They're like 4, 5, 6, you're just in grind mode and you're in it with them. And, then they start to get a little bit of personality, get a little bit of freedom in their life. For me, it was like I maybe started to get bored in my business a little bit, right? Like unchallenged in my business. The business is doing really well. You're making money, but like, is it challenging you? Is it exciting for you? And maybe start to take like the eye off the ball a little bit, right? And in that same period of time, we had a competitor come to the market in 2019, specifically in digital marketing in orthodontists, and pretty much copy everything that we were doing. And maybe not, in some ways, copying and doing better, in other ways, copying and not doing as well, to where it became very clear that like we were really good at it. If you were the kind of people who wanted a great brand and cared about what your website looked like and cared about how your content looked and cared about the relationship with your company, then you were probably going with us. If you just cared about the data and the numbers and the growth, then they were maybe doing a little bit better job of that this competitor was. And so as we started to see that pressure from that, then we see pressure come in from AI. I'm looking around the business and I'm thinking to myself, like, man, like this could go the other way. This business could kind of plateau. And certainly once you stop growing in a business, I mean, you might as well be dying because your employees want to make more money, right? So if you want to keep talent, you want to keep growing your employees, you got to keep growing your business. So I'd say that was a pretty scary moment for me to realize, like, we've got a lot of pressure competition wise coming in. You've got AI is disrupting our business. And then you've got private equity coming in and wanting to invest in this space. And the thing about private equity investing into a space that you're heavily involved in, and you're not the person that they're backing, now they're backing one of your competitors. Now you have a huge influx of millions of dollars coming to be back to compete against you. So I thought to myself, well, that's probably not where I want to be, right? I probably want to be, if someone's going to be backed by private equity in the space, I wanted it to be me. So I started talking to private equity, and at the same time, I just kept asking them as many questions as they were asking me. And they knew a lot of information about one of my competitors, the same one that I was telling you about that, it kind of come into the space and modeled a lot of what they were doing after us. And I just thought to myself, the only way they know all this about my competitors is that they're probably talking to my competitor as well. So one day I called up the CEO of the competitor company and I was like, hey, I just had breakfast with this guy and he knew a lot about you guys. It tells you that you're probably in a similar situation that we're in. And he was like, I was like, if we're going to sell to private equity, let's merge our companies together as equals and then go do it at a much bigger multiple. Let's kind of work the kinks out. Let's have a bigger, better product to go to market. And a lot of the things we're talking about doing, like we can do mergers and acquisitions on our own. We can grow our market share on our own. And so that clicked with them pretty quickly. And so he was like, let me call you in about a month because he was under LOI at the time to sell this company. He called me a week later because that LOI had fallen apart pretty quickly. And, 3 days after that, we were sitting in Porch and Parlor with the four founders of those businesses working on a merger.
Wow.
And so it happened pretty quickly where we got the merger completed. And then almost as soon as we had the merger completed, we had identified a private equity firm to sell to, and which was great for me because they had a great COO And the CEO still wanted to be super heavily involved. So it was like the perfect opportunity for me to bring in somebody to do operations, have a CEO where I didn't have to worry like where that, people hitting on my phone all day, every day, and grab a lot of that freedom back that I really wanted and still be sitting in the same cap position as everybody else.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's such an interesting process to go through all of that, and so I'm curious to know now your post acquisition with private equity, and now we're sitting inside Barron Speakeasy.
Yeah.
So kind of what excites you today in the business world? Why Barron Speakeasy, but also the other things that you're interested in looking at, like, post equity, right? Coming in and cashing out. Now, what's the next step for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's doing things that I want to do, right? So Bar 33 inside of the Barron's here, it was a passion project, very much so. And so getting to take on that passion project, but I also don't want to be like a bar. I don't want to like run a bar every day either, right? So operations is not necessarily huge passion for me. Beyond that, I love the city of Memphis. Grew up here. I've been blessed enough to travel, and I want to continue to give back to the city. We've got a huge affordable housing issue here in Memphis, and something that you and I have talked about a lot. So I really want to start tackling that issue where we can give people homes and neighborhoods near schools that are being invested in, that they can be proud of, that they can take care of, and maybe even give them that path to ownership too, right? Where we can show them, here's how you manage your finances, here's job readiness, here's industries that, are going to be taking off in the future, things like the trades and electricians and plumbing, and really help, not just be a landlord, right? But also kind of be a guide for these people to their next level. So that's really, I think, where I'm at right now is when I invest my time and money and energy effort into something, does it leave legacy? Does it improve the home that grew, that raised me?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, and just curious to get your thoughts on, so why real estate, right? Why is that now? Post all of the things that you've done, why is that the focus? Why is that the passion?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One, I think that, when you're building something tangible, I built digital things for so long and they're beautiful and they're on the internet, but like they kind of come and go. When you build a house or you own a piece of property or you own a waterfront property, you develop a neighborhood, like that's something that your kids are going to drop by, your grandkids, that is going to be known and seen forever. And, real estate cash flows, it almost has always over time appreciated. It's just such as safe as an investment could be. It's a very safe investment vehicle. And Memphis is that one market that I know intimately that's never been overinflated. You can't go do what we're talking about doing in Nashville or Dallas or Austin, Texas, or Salt Lake City or Denver, but it's still so prime and ripe to happen here in Memphis.
Yeah, it's really a unique opportunity, and it's just exciting to hear, a fellow investor and someone who, I think we think a lot of like in terms of just business, and we have a similar background coming up in food service. So it's just really cool to hear your passion about real estate, because I too have a passion for real estate and just think it's really great. So,
you and I met through a mutual friend, one of the greatest connector of humans I've ever met, and Dan Robinson. And Dan knew, right? Because I'm very much a vision guy. I have this huge vision for 10,000 affordable homes in Memphis. And he's like, who the hell's going to operate that for you? And then you're in it, right? Like you are the operations guy. So it's really cool. I think when two guys with big vision and big goals and aspirations and dreams can come together and know kind of exactly how they fit into the puzzle. That's how big things happen in cities.
Yeah, that's amazing. And again, we met through a lunch.
That's right.
Which really ties into the purpose of what I'm trying to do here, is that our mutual connection set up a lunch between the three of us. We sat down, we formed a friendship now, and then we're talking about doing things, for business and real estate for the future. And it's just amazing how that kind of can all tie in, right?
Yeah.
What is something that, if you could go back and tell your younger self or give your younger self some advice, what do you think you would go back to your younger self and say?
To bet on yourself, like sooner, believe in yourself early on. I mean, I always had self-belief, but I think the path to entrepreneurship is a windy, rocky, brutal road, you know, for it to all be on you, for you, you know, and I went from like, my first payroll was like $7,000. I got to where monthly payroll was $700,000. And like, until you have to lay in bed and realize you got to hit $700,000 this month just to make your payroll, it's impossible to understand what a pressure like that looks like. So if you're built for it, if you want it, like take it on early, because it's only, you know, you're going to start it with a $7,000 payroll, but eventually it's going to get to $700,000. And the sooner you get into that pressure cooker, the sooner you bet on yourself and start to realize like, oh, I can do this, the better off you're going to be. So I would go back to my younger self and I would say, you know, bet more, fail more, try more, do more.
Yeah, that's amazing. I often would think the same thing, that if I could go back and tell my younger self, like, start a property management company earlier, you know. And I mean, I think that, look, everything I learned along the way were great, valuable lessons. And you did the same thing in sales roles where you work for companies. And I'm sure you built some foundation there that was extremely useful when you went to manage, right, your own company. But at the same time, it's like, man, if I had started 10 years before, you know, where would I be, right?
Probably on a private jet right now.
Right, probably on that private jet. Yeah. So, but I'll have to wait 10 years for that.
We'll get there.
That's all right. So,
yeah.
Cool.
We'll do in 10 years. We'll loop this back. We'll do it on a PJ.
Yeah, we can do the follow up on the plane. That would be amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, Alex, man, thank you so much. I truly appreciate your openness and your willingness to, you know, one, allow us to use your space, but also to be on the podcast and just share with everybody kind of your story and everything that happened. So really, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's an honor, Scott. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You're doing a great thing. You've done a great thing in the city, and it's great to be connected with another brother's boy that's got passions that I have.
That's right, man. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks.
All right, brother.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.